There is a photograph of the surface of Mars taken by a NASA spacecraft that shows a three-sided pyramid standing alone in a canyon. Not a smudge, not a blur. A structure with straight edges and flat faces casting a hard, triangular shadow across the Martian floor. And here is the part that should stop you cold. NASA's own cameras have captured this exact same object in the exact same place 5 separate times across 15 years and 3 different spacecraft. Different sunlight, different seasons, different orbits, different machines, and every single time the 3 sides came back. This is not one lucky frame that happened to line up. This is a feature the red planet has shown us again and again, refusing to disappear no matter how the light falls on it. The images are real, the coordinates are public. You can pull them from NASA's archive right now, and the object sitting at those coordinates looks to a startling number of the people who first found it, like something that was built. Today, we are going to walk through exactly what was photographed on Mars, who found it, why it keeps appearing, and why the official explanation for it leaves the most important question completely unanswered. Stay with me, because the part everyone argues about online is not the part that should unsettle you. Most people have never actually looked at the raw Mars images. They see a headline, they see a cropped thumbnail, they scroll past. They assume that if there were really a pyramid on another planet, it would be the only thing anyone talked about for a decade. So they file it under internet nonsense and move on. Most people walk right past the real mystery without ever knowing it's there. Because the strangest thing about this formation is not that it exists in one picture, it is that it exists in every picture. It has been sitting in the same spot, on the same canyon floor, holding the same shape, since before there were cameras pointed at Mars at all. And until very recently, almost no one, outside a small circle of researchers, knew it was there. The structure sits inside a place called Candor Chasma. That name won't mean anything to you yet, so here is what matters about it. Candor Chasma is one section of the largest canyon system in the entire solar system, a wound in the Martian crust called Valles Marineris that runs roughly 2,500 miles long and plunges as deep as 4 miles down. To put that in human terms, if you laid that canyon across the United States, it would stretch from one coast to the other. The Grand Canyon in Arizona would vanish inside one of its side channels. And down on the floor of the western end of this impossible canyon, in a region scoured flat by wind for billions of years, something rises up with 3 clean faces and a peak. The formation is roughly 290 meters across at its base and about 145 meters tall. That is not a boulder. That is not a rock you could walk around in an afternoon. It is the size of a small mountain, and it is shaped from above like a pyramid. Here is the first thing that should make you uncomfortable. When researchers measured the 3 faces, they did not find the lumpy randomness you would expect from a pile of eroded stone. They found something closer to geometry. One analyst who studied the shape concluded the faces met at angles near 30 degrees, 60 degrees, and 90 degrees, a right angle, on the floor of an alien canyon, and the symmetry held up across the different images taken years apart, under completely different lighting. That consistency is the whole problem. Erosion is chaotic. It does not usually carve the same clean triangle over and over from every direction. And yet, image after image, the triangle was there. Now, for most of modern history, we assumed Mars was dead rock and nothing more, a frozen desert, a place where the only shapes were craters and dunes. That was the entire map. And then the machines we sent there started photographing things that did not fit, things that looked uncomfortably like they belonged on Earth. The people who first noticed were not fringe cranks shouting on street corners. Some of them worked for NASA, and that is where this story actually begins. Because the Candor Chasma pyramid is not the first pyramid we have found on Mars. It is the latest in a line of them, stretching back more than 50 years, And every time one appears, the same argument breaks out, and the same question gets left hanging. If you find buried history as unsettling as I do, keep watching, because what comes next is the part the textbooks would rather you never connected. To understand why this one formation matters, you have to go back to 1972. That year, a NASA spacecraft called Mariner 9 became the first machine in history to orbit another planet. It arrived at Mars in the middle of a planet-wide dust storm, so total that the surface was completely hidden. For weeks, the cameras saw nothing but a blank orange haze. Then the dust settled, and as the surface slowly emerged, Mariner 9 sent back over 7,000 images of a Mars no one had ever seen. Volcanoes larger than any mountain on Earth, dry riverbeds, that vast canyon, and in a region called Elysium, something else, structures, triangular and polygonal shapes that rose off the plain and cast sharp geometric shadows at sunset. These were not small. The triangular ones measured around 3 kilometers across at the base. The larger polygonal ones spanned roughly 6 kilometers. And they caught the attention of one of the most famous scientists who ever lived. Carl Sagan, the astronomer who spent his career warning people not to jump to extraordinary conclusions, looked at those Elysium shapes and could not simply wave them away. He put the image in his book and television series, and he wrote a line that has echoed ever since. The largest pyramids on Mars, he noted, have a base width of about 3 kilometers and a height of 1 kilometer, which makes them far larger than the pyramids of Egypt. He offered the careful, sober explanation. He said they were probably small hills sandblasted into shape by centuries of wind. And then he added the sentence that keeps this whole mystery alive. He said, they needed to be viewed from nearby to be sure. Not that they were natural, that we could not yet know. The most cautious scientist of his generation looked at the pyramids of Mars and admitted we did not have the answer. That is clue number 1. And more than 50 years later, no spacecraft has ever gone to those Elysium structures to settle it. They are still sitting there, unvisited, exactly as Mariner 9 found them. In 1974, 2 researchers published a formal paper in the scientific journal Icarus, titled simply Pyramidal Structures on Mars. They described the Elysium shapes casting their triangular shadows. They noted the structures tended to line up in rows, as if following some hidden order, and their careful conclusion was that these were probably wind-faceted volcanic cones, or blocks of solidified lava that had been rotated and shaped by geology. A reasonable answer, a natural answer. But here is the problem. That answer never fully solved. Nowhere on Earth does ordinary erosion reliably produce clean 3-sided and 4-sided pyramids, standing in rows kilometers wide, sharp enough that a Nobel-adjacent astronomer would pause over them. The mainstream explanation was plausible. It was just never proven. And that pattern, a strange shape, a quick natural explanation, and no follow-up to confirm it, is about to repeat itself in a way that made headlines around the world. Here's where it gets strange. Because 2 years after that paper, in the summer of 1976, a different NASA spacecraft photographed something in a different region of Mars that no explanation could quiet. On July 25, 1976, the Viking 1 orbiter passed over a region in the northern hemisphere called Cydonia. It was mapping potential landing sites, taking routine images of the terrain below. And in one frame, catalog number 70A13, there was a mesa, a flat-topped hill about 3 kilometers long and 2 kilometers wide. Except this hill, under the low angle of the Martian sun, did not look like a hill. It looked like a face. 2 eye sockets, a nose, a mouth. A humanoid face nearly 2 miles from end to end, staring straight up off the surface of another planet. NASA released it almost as a joke, a curiosity, a trick of light and shadow. But the image did something no one expected. It refused to die. Because when two computer scientists at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center, Vincent DiPietro and Gregory Molinar, dug the original data out of the archive and ran it through image enhancement, they did not find the illusion falling apart. They found it getting sharper. And as they scanned the terrain around the face, they found more. A cluster of formations they came to call the city, arranged with a strange rectilinear order, as if laid out on a grid. And a few miles from the face, one object stood out above all the others, a massive pyramid. When it was later analyzed by researcher Richard Hoagland and geometry specialist Errol Torin, they concluded it was not four-sided and not three-sided, but five-sided. Bilaterally symmetrical, meaning one half mirrored the other, like a living thing. They named it the D&M Pyramid, after the two men who first pulled it from the data, and they measured it as roughly 3 kilometers along each face and about 1 kilometer high. A five-sided mountain, taller than the tallest buildings humans have ever constructed, sitting a short distance from a 2-mile-long face, in a region that from above looked disturbingly like a ruin. That was the moment the pyramids of Mars stopped being a footnote and became one of the most controversial images in the history of space exploration. And here is where I have to be careful with you, because this is where the story splits. The mainstream reading of Cydonia is that all of it, the face, the city, the five-sided pyramid, is an accident of erosion, low resolution, and the human brain's desperate hunger to see faces and order in random noise. Hold on to that. We will come back to it, and it deserves a fair hearing. But first you need to understand why the people who studied these shapes could not let them go. Because they did not just say the shapes looked artificial. They said the shapes contained mathematics. This is the second clue, and it is the one that turned a strange photograph into something researchers spent decades unable to explain away. When Torin analyzed the internal angles of the five-sided pyramid, he reported that the relationships between them kept producing specific, meaningful numbers, not random values, mathematical constants. The ratios, he claimed, encoded things like the square root of 3, and even references to pi and to the golden ratio, the proportion that shows up again and again in living things and in classical architecture on Earth. Hoagland went further. He argued the entire Cydonia complex was laid out according to a geometry built around a tetrahedron, a four-sided pyramid shape, and that the structures were aligned to mark the position of the sun on the Martian summer solstice. Not the solstice as it falls today, a solstice configuration from the deep past, which, if you took the claim seriously, would date the construction to hundreds of thousands of years ago. Now, think about what that claim actually says. It says that someone, or something, took the angles of a mountain-sized object on Mars and hid inside them the same numbers that govern spirals in seashells and the proportions of the Great Pyramid at Giza. It says, the arrangement was a message, deliberately written into the landscape, meant to be read from orbit by whoever came looking. The skeptics called it numerology, finding patterns in noise, the same way you can find shapes in clouds. And they may be right. We will get there. But notice what the claim did. It moved the argument off of, does this look like a face? And onto, why do the measurements keep landing on numbers that mean something? That is a much harder thing to explain with wind and shadow. And it is the reason this mystery would not stay buried. If this is the kind of hidden history that keeps you up at night, subscribe now, because the third piece is the one that connects Mars to the sand under our own feet. Because there is one more layer to this, and it is the layer that gives today's video its name. The connection to Egypt is not just that these Martian shapes are pyramids, it is where they sit and how they line up. Researchers noticed that on Mars, in the Tharsis region, 3 enormous volcanoes stand in a row, with a nearby feature beside them. And the arrangement of those 3 volcanoes, some argued, matches the layout of the 3 Great Pyramids at Giza, with the Sphinx beside them. 3 large structures in a line, with a 4th element off to the side. The same pattern, they claimed, on two different worlds. Others drew a second line from the Elysium pyramid field to the ancient pyramid complex at Teotihuacan in Mexico. The idea that emerged from all of this was staggering in its simplicity and its madness. What if the pyramid was never an Egyptian invention at all? What if the impulse to build these specific shapes aligned in these specific ways came from somewhere older than Egypt, older than any civilization we have a record of? What if we were copying something? Not a myth, not a metaphor, a physical claim about physical structures on two planets, and it rests on a genuinely eerie observation that even skeptics have to reckon with. Of all the shapes a civilization could build, the pyramid is the one that appears independently again and again across cultures that supposedly never met. Egypt built them. The peoples of Mesoamerica built them. Ancient builders in Asia raised pyramid-shaped mounds. The form shows up on nearly every inhabited continent, from cultures separated by oceans and thousands of years. The standard explanation is that a pyramid is simply the most stable way to pile stone very high. So of course, everyone arrived at it. And that is true. It is the sensible answer. But the people who study Cydonia turned it around and asked a darker question. If the shape is universal here on Earth, appearing among people who never spoke to each other, then why would we assume the impulse stops at Earth? Why would we be surprised to find it carved into the floor of a canyon on Mars? That question is the thread I want you to hold on to for the rest of this video, because it is the one that never gets answered. Not by NASA, not by the skeptics, not by anyone. Where does the pyramid actually come from? And now we arrive at the formation that reopened the whole case. The one in Candor Chasma, the three-sided structure that started us off. For a long time, the Cydonia formations were the center of the argument. But in June of 2002, an independent researcher named Wilmer Faust was scanning through Mars Global Surveyor images when he found something new. Not in Cydonia, far to the south, down in the western reaches of that vast canyon system, in Candor Chasma. It was a three-sided pyramid, clean and symmetrical, sitting on the canyon floor. The image was real NASA data, a frame cataloged as E0600269. And when other researchers examined it, one detail jumped out immediately. This was not a rough four-sided Egyptian shape. This was a true three-sided form, what geometers call a tetrahedron, and its three triangular faces appeared remarkably uniform. An electrical engineer and imaging specialist named Dr. Mark Carlotto, who had spent years analyzing the Cydonia images, studied the Candor formation and concluded it showed evidence of artificial design. He measured those faces at approximately 30, 60, and 90 degrees. And then something happened that separates this formation from a single lucky photograph. Other spacecraft went back and looked. NASA's Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, carrying the most powerful camera ever sent to another planet, a system called HiRISE, capable of resolving objects the size of a desk from orbit, photographed the region. The Mars Odyssey orbiter imaged it. Between 2001 and 2016, the formation was captured on 5 separate occasions by multiple spacecraft under wildly different conditions of light and shadow and season. And every time, the three sides held. This is the detail that matters most. So sit with it. When you photograph a random pile of rubble from different angles under different light, it looks different every time. Shadows shift, edges appear and vanish. The shape you thought you saw dissolves. But the Candor formation did not dissolve. Across 15 years and different instruments, it kept presenting the same three-sided symmetry. Not similar, not roughly comparable, the same. That consistency is exactly what you would expect from a solid, geometric, deliberately shaped object. And it is exactly what erosion is not supposed to reliably produce. The researcher who backed these findings, George Haas of a group called the Cydonia Institute, put it in the bluntest possible terms. He said, "You don't have to be a geologist to know the difference between a rock and a sculpture, between something random and something geometric." Another researcher, Keith Laney, who had spent years scanning Mars imagery for the anomalous, said of the earlier Cydonia pyramid, a line that could apply to all of them. "Were this found anywhere on Earth," he said, "we would surely be digging into it." Think about the weight of that sentence. If you found a 290-meter, three-sided pyramid with right-angle faces standing alone in a desert here on Earth, no one would call it a hill and walk away. There would be excavations, there would be teams, there would be a global race to understand it. But because it is on Mars, and because reaching it is currently impossible, it just sits there in the archive, photographed and cataloged, and left alone. That is the institutional resistance in this story. Not a conspiracy of shadowy men hiding files. Something quieter and almost stranger, a discovery too far away to confirm and too strange to fully embrace. So it gets a quick natural label, and everyone moves on. The formation in Candor Chasma remains accessible only by orbital images. No rover has driven to it, no lander has touched it. The one thing that would end the debate, going there, has never been done, and there are no plans to do it. And notice the pattern that runs through all of this, from 1972 to today, every single time. Mariner 9 finds the Elysium pyramids, and they are labeled probable wind-carved cones, and no one goes to check. Viking finds the face and the five-sided pyramid, and they are labeled tricks of light, and the region is rephotographed but never visited. Candor Chasma reveals a three-sided pyramid confirmed across 5 images, and it is labeled a natural knob, and it sits there untouched. The explanation is always ready. The confirmation never comes. For 50 years, we have been photographing pyramids on Mars and explaining them away from 140 million miles off, without ever putting a single instrument on the ground beside one. That is not the same as knowing what they are. It is deciding what they are. Now, does any of this prove the most extreme version of the story? That an ancient civilization built monuments on Mars, that they encoded mathematics into the stone, that the pyramid building impulse on Earth is an echo of something older and off-world? Probably not. Let me be honest with you, because the truth deserves better than hype. The mainstream explanation has real weight behind it, and you need to hear it fairly. Mars is covered in features geologists call positive relief knobs. These are chunks of hard, durable rock that were once buried inside softer bedrock. Over billions of years, wind and erosion stripped the softer material away, leaving the tough cores standing alone, like tree stumps in a cleared field. And these knobs are not small. They can be a full kilometer across and tens of meters tall. The Candor Formation, at 290 meters wide, fits comfortably inside that category. It sits in a bed of wind-carved ripples, in a canyon shaped by water, landslides, and wind over unimaginable spans of time. And when you zoom out from the tight, cropped image that goes viral and look at the whole landscape, the pyramid starts to look less alien and more like one lumpy hill among many similar hills. Look closely at the high-resolution, high-rise images, the skeptics point out, and the ridges on the formation are not razor-perfect the way a machined structure would be. They are bumpy, uneven, and the 3 sides are not actually equal in length. Earth has natural pyramids too. A mountain called Cerro Tusa in Colombia rises in a near-perfect triangular peak, and no one built it. China has entire regions famous for pyramid-shaped mountains, carved by nothing but weather. One expert on Mars, Pascal Lee of the Mars Institute, looked at the viral images and said plainly that nothing about them screams alien civilization to him. That you can see the same rock layers typical of the region sticking out of the side of the hill. And then there is the deepest problem of all, the one that haunts every anomaly like this: human pattern recognition. Our brains are pattern-finding machines, tuned by evolution to spot faces and order everywhere, even in pure noise. It is called pareidolia. It is the same reflex that shows you animals in clouds and a face on the surface of the moon. When NASA sent back sharper images of the Cydonia face decades later, much of the humanoid detail did soften into ordinary eroded rock. The eyes and mouth that seemed so clear in 1976 were partly artifacts of low resolution and a single angle of light. So no, this is not proof of Martian builders. I am not going to insult you by pretending it is. But here is what that grounded, skeptical view still cannot make ordinary. Strip away every wild theory, every claim about ancient astronauts and encoded messages, and you are left with a set of plain facts that are arguably stranger than the fantasy. A three-sided formation on the floor of the largest canyon in the solar system, holding the same geometric shape across 5 separate images, 15 years, and multiple spacecraft. Pyramid-shaped structures in Elysium, so striking that the most careful astronomer of the 20th century put them in his book and admitted we would have to go there to be sure. A 5-sided, mirror-symmetric mountain in Cydonia that a trained imaging engineer said showed signs of design. And a shape, the pyramid, that humanity built independently on nearly every continent, for reasons we still debate, appearing again on the one nearby world we have never set foot on. You do not need aliens to be unsettled by that. You just need to look at what is actually in the images and then admit the honest thing. We have never gone to check. Not once. In over half a century of finding these shapes, not a single one has ever been visited, touched, or drilled. And if even the modest version of this is true, that these are natural formations, it still means something uncomfortable. It means Mars, a planet we filed away as dead and boring, is quietly sculpting shapes so precise that our own scientists cannot agree from orbit whether they are the work of wind or the work of hands. It means the line between the natural and the artificial is thinner and blurrier than we like to admit. Thin enough that a right angle on an alien canyon floor can start a 50-year argument that no one has been able to end. It means our picture of that world is not a finished portrait. It is a sketch with the most important pieces missing. And if we cannot say for certain what a mountain-sized object on the most photographed nearby planet actually is, then how confident should we really be about everything else we have decided from a distance? Here is the one question that will not let go. The pyramid is the single most repeated monumental form in human history. It rose from the sands of Egypt and the jungles of Mexico and the plains of Asia, among peoples who, as far as we know, never met. We have never fully explained why. We tell ourselves it is just the easiest way to stack stone. Maybe that is all it is. But that same shape, three-sided and geometric, is now sitting in a Martian canyon, photographed again and again, refusing to look like an accident, and impossible for us to reach. So the question is not really whether there is a pyramid on Mars. The images show a pyramid-shaped object, and no one disputes the object is there. The question is, the one that has been opened since Mariner 9 first cut through the dust in 1972. The one Carl Sagan asked and could not answer. The one every image since has only sharpened. Where does the pyramid come from? Why this shape, on this world and ours? And why, in 50 years, have we never once gone to find out? It is still there, right now, tonight, as you watch this. A three-sided structure on the floor of a canyon, deeper than any on Earth, on a cold red world where only the wind has moved for billions of years. NASA has its coordinates. NASA has photographed it 5 times. And NASA has never sent anything to stand beside it. It was found, it was confirmed, and then it was left exactly as it was, in the dark and the cold and the silence, holding its 3 perfect faces up toward the same sun that lights the pyramids of Egypt, waiting for someone to finally cross the distance and answer the only question that matters. If this is the kind of buried history that keeps you awake, watch the next investigation playing on your screen right now, because the discovery in that one connects to this in a way you will not see coming.